Hello, my name is Marina and I'm from Sutina, and I've been trying to do podcasts. I'm a bit of a novice at this, so just recently there was an article that came out in the Edmonton Journal about our leadership in Sutina, and I find myself wanting to share my concerns and support for all those who are affected by the news. Um, as those who've lived through similar experiences of violence, I extend my heartfelt concern for them. It, it brings up so much grief and triggers for people in the community who've been victims of violence, as well as even memories of people who lost their lives from victims of violence. It's not an easy thing to talk about. Uh, Most of the community, I believe, are in shock. Some some are. I really don't know. I haven't talked to too many people, but the ones that I have talked to, I've only can relate my own story because it was published in a newspaper article that Chief Roy Whitney was charged this past Wednesday with two historical sexual assault charges. Now, they published it so that other victims may come forward. And this is a bit of a change here for me in my understanding. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but from my own personal experience, um, it was a little different for me when I was 18 and 19 and I was sexually assaulted. It took me decades before I even disclosed, and even the whole preliminary or the process of having it gone to court was historical as well. And I'm only mentioning in this podcast because I do think people who have been victims of violence who were young, like I was 19. Now these two young men from Sudina, like I say young because at the time they were young in their 30s. I think now they're in their 60s, but they came forward. Um, when I came forward, it wasn't published. Um, it wasn't published, and the only way or the only time it was ever published was after my perpetrator was found guilty. And even then, too, like right now, it was published in the newspapers, and so there's talk. There's this concern, like there could be other victims out there, and rightfully so. Like I'm being realistic here, and this is why I'm sharing my podcast. When I decided to file a complaint, it took 6 years of going through RCMP officers, and it took me going through three RCMP officers to get enough information. I didn't know what they were doing. They didn't contact me for 6 years. I didn't know they had gone to various members of my community asking questions about me because the laws back then in the 70s were so totally different for women. So when a woman was sexually assaulted, and again, I didn't know this, so I'm sharing this information for people who, are curious about um, if they're a victim and how do they approach this. And again, each time and each decade is different with the laws. But in the 70s, a woman who, again, you got to understand, women couldn't own a credit card, couldn't own a house. I think it was just in the 60s when birth control was brought forward. So there's been a lot of changes in terms of even Indigenous women marrying who we wanted to marry. This being the case, too, also when it comes to sexual assault charges, um, the law had stated that women had to disclose within a year to someone that this crime had happened against them. Now, again, you've got to look at my case. It had been 20 years. Like, it was in the 70s that I disclosed. And so um, they had to interview people. Now, I didn't know this again. Like I said, I didn't know that they were asking people in my community of Sutina. They didn't inform me, so I didn't know. I do know that one of my brothers got upset at me, and I didn't know what for. But he said somebody just came up to me and confronted me and just punched me in the face for no reason. And I'm going, I don't know, because really I didn't know. My trying to do what I was doing for myself, I wasn't trying to get any fame or glory. I just wanted to heal. I wanted to know what it felt like to heal. I wanted to know, like, what is this whole process of witnessing or experiencing justice for myself. I didn't know. I think if the RCMP had informed me, and if I had time to let my family know what was going on to prepare them for what the people in the community were talking about, but I didn't. So as a result, like I said, I think certain members of my family were affected, again, because I didn't know. Um, and I'm just saying that this is different. This charges led against our leader, our head chief, is historical, because this took place in the 90s and the early 2000s, which is similar to mine. Like, mine took a couple of decades as well. But however, what is different is that it's been published. He was charged, and so they've got time to collect more evidence against him. Whereas for me, it was after the fact, and the fact that it took 6 years. And in those 6 years, what was disclosed to me by the RCMP during the court, when I stood in front of my perpetrator and told him he had hurt me, I had been told that there were 20 other victims of these serial rapists uh, who had who had disclosed to the RCMP that they had been victims. And when the RCMP had asked them if they would come forward in support of my case, they denied it and said they didn't want to participate. And as long as they um, told the RCMP that it was true, these men were perpetrators. I don't know if they thought it was going to help my case. Obviously, it would have helped if they had come forward. But from the RCMP records, I was the youngest of all of the victims of these two men. One of the men died when he was, I think, 28 or 29. So, and the other is still alive. It's been, geez, almost 20, 30 years, 29 years now since he's served time, sentenced and served time. So, and he still lives in Sutina. So when I talk about restorative and transformative justice, there are a lot of things that happen within Indigenous First Nations, Métis, Inuit communities, and they're historical. That's why sometimes when I think about people who are pretending to be Indigenous, like they don't get it. A lot of things that we deal with are historical because we grow up in our communities. And this being said, um, I just wanted to make sure that those men who came forward, um, I support them. I support them because I know what it's like to have lateral violence against you, trying to silence you, trying to make sure that you don't speak up, don't don't have a word or anything to say. People throughout, I think, just maybe in the back of Indian residential school, they were taught to not say anything and be quiet. I've listened to so many survivors of Indian residential school who witnessed violence against classmates, like roommates, dorm mates, call them what call a survivor, whatever name that you want to call them. And I know a lot of these children who grew up became parents. Some of them became perpetrators themselves, and it's the logic of it. It's the logic of being a human being and being curious about what healthy sexuality is. That's taken away when you've been sexually assaulted. You feel powerless. You feel alone. You feel like nobody loves you. You wonder, why is this happening to me? And again, it's like this learned helplessness, because you wonder, is this going to happen to me all the time? Just the abuse, and I'm not just talking about the sexual assault. I'm talking about just the way people treat another human being, whether they even look at them and trust them, or even know that they exist. I I know people have been saying, "Oh, proven innocent until proven guilty." For me, it's more than just that. I think because of the historical context of Indian residential school and just the amount of murdered and missing Indigenous people. When I look at historically, and I'll use an analogy. When when I was growing up, I used to get on the bus every day, get bussed into the city of Calgary, and I had a relative I'd sit with, and every day we'd ride into school, talking and laughing, and you're really just being kids. And I'm sharing this childhood story for a reason. In my culture, where our children are raised to be holy, I didn't totally understand this concept until I became an elder. So, and because of my lived experience, I want to explain to you, there are very few people, especially elders like myself, who have this memory. And I'm using this as an analogy for supporting victims of violence. My friend, my relative, we were happy. She was brilliant. She read all the time. She had these. She just would inspire me about life, and there was a certain energy she had as children. I mean, she was a born leader. She organized things, and as kids, as children, like we're talking children. And I really, to this day, I was talking with her son yesterday, and I said, I am the person who I am because of your mother. I said, but the reality of it is, like, I remember she went missing, and I said to her son, she was there physically, but she wasn't the same person that I knew as a child. That's my childhood memory of another child. I think that's important because a lot of times our parents or grandparents in those residential schools never really had memories with another childhood friend who went missing. Now, when I'm saying missing, I'm not talking about the physical missing. I'm talking about the spiritual and emotional missing. Something horrific had happened to her, and she went missing inside herself. She wasn't the same child I knew. And as we became teenagers, she even became more distant, went into alcohol and drug abuse, had three beautiful boys, and then passed away. Now, this is a story similar to most Indigenous women, but I want to focus on Indigenous children and how we now must look at our young people, our children, as holy children. We want to guarantee that these children with childhood memories, as the way a child should be, they carry those memories in a sacred way until they become elderly. Most of the people I knew as a child with my childhood memory went missing. I think a lot of people don't understand when they say murdered and missing Indigenous people. And it's not just I'm saying this in the sense that I I know what it is to be Indigenous. I don't need non-Indigenous people to look and say, oh, it's an Indigenous thing. They grew up in a poor community. It's expected for them to be incestuous or savage like or alcohol and drug abuse, and you name all the historical, oppressive thoughts and narratives that non-Indigenous people have created for me. Okay, why do they create it for me? Because what? They expect that I've gone missing as a child, spiritually and emotionally and psychologically. And because of that, they create a narrative. And I'm going, no, you can't do that. For me as an elder and my voice, you cannot create a narrative, a false narrative, and pretend that you're Indigenous because you yourself have had violence against you, or you yourself can articulate that, oh, this is what must be like, because you yourself are running away from your own issues. That's why I'm so passionate and compassionate and pure violent, like really intensely advocating, because I had childhood friends who went missing, brilliant, beautiful, educated children. We played together, laughed together. My history and the what I chose to do and the things that I sacrificed so I could live my life the way I wanted to live is different than most Indigenous women, because I chose not to get married. I saw in my community women being, walking around with black eyes. And it didn't matter if you were non-Indigenous, because you got to understand, in Canada, non-Indigenous women could marry Indigenous men and gain status. So even those non-Indigenous women had black eyes. I, again, too, because of the silence and oppression of healthy human sexuality, a lot of parents never spoke to their children about sexuality. I made a comment in front of educated people, and one of them started laughing because I said my mother was in Indian residential school, and when she was pregnant, she thought she was going to have a litter of puppies. And the woman laughed, and I looked at her in the audience of about 50 or 100 people, and I said, my mother was raised in an Indian residential school. I said, do you understand? Nobody cared about her as a child. Nobody educated her about human sexuality. She was like treated like an animal who's supposed to just figure things out for themselves. Like that oppression, that worthlessness, that she's invisible, she's worth nothing. Like grooming her to behave and live a certain way. And I tend to try to explain to people, when people groom people from childhood, they think it's normal, and they raise their children, they groom their children the same way those supervisors and monitors and workers in those Indian residential schools treated them. I'm very fortunate that I went to school in the city of Calgary, and that every day I was bused into the city, and that by the age of 9 I was quite well versed in English. And even to this day, when people hear me, even if you closed your eyes and were listening to me, until you open your eyes and actually see me, you wouldn't think that I was Indigenous. It's been a blessing as well as a curse, but yet at the same time, I want to let you know I understand this, but I also want to bring it across to people in that it's important. The people I buried, especially the women who I grew up with, who were holy children, just like myself, laughed and played and enjoyed life, enjoyed going to school, enjoyed learning. And then something happened. They went missing. I say this too in the sense that, when my niece, Roberta, she went missing. And again, I say emotionally and spiritually. This little girl adored me, looked up to me. Yeah, she would do anything for me. Like I'd ask her to do something, and she was just so happy to please me. And then all of a sudden, she stopped listening to me. She ignored me, wouldn't talk to me, just created thoughts about me that didn't exist. She went missing. There was no way I could even get through to her, especially when it came to the men who were grooming her, adults grooming her. So, and the thing is, like with human trafficking, it's amazing that this grooming and this whole process, that some people may see it as normal because, again, you know, what is grooming? How does a person think that being controlled by another person is appropriate? As a child, when you're growing up that way and you think that it's normal, of course you're going to question whether people have the best interest in you. And rightfully so. Like I said, when people think that you do not have a voice, they will step in because of their privilege and create a narrative for you. That's why it's so important for victims of violence to go through this process of healing. When I went through this, I had a friend, a forensic nurse. I started creating support groups for myself because I strongly believe to this day it takes a community to raise a child and it takes a community to heal a child. And it's the same thing with victims of violence. It takes a community to help heal a victim. Not just one family, but a group of families need to help. She said to me, she said, once you go through this process, you'll wonder, why didn't I do it earlier? Now I'm creating these podcasts so that at least victims of violence will try and understand, because I didn't have anybody to guide me through this process. And this process includes like systemic racism. It's a structure that is there to oppress, much like perpetrators oppressing the victims. And the thing about it is like you have to give it a name. See, for me, it's sexual assault. The name for me is I was brutally raped. That's a name. It takes a lot of courage and challenge to say it to somebody. For years, I would talk about it to women, and all they'd go is, yeah, okay. See, I just thought that talking about it was a way of healing, but it wasn't, because there was no action to it. I didn't understand that until a friend of mine who again, this forensic nurse, said to me, because I mean, I spoke to so many women, and this is the important thing about women. We need to do and understand these things because so much and so little has been done for us to move forward, to understand our own capacity, our own power, our own narrative. She said to me, as I spoke to her, she self reflected back to me and she said, do those men, do those people, did they ever know that they hurt you? Did you tell them they hurt you? And I thought, well, yeah. I said, I'm telling you the story. She says, no. Did you did you like I didn't know because I had created this narrative. I just assumed that somehow by my telling people, the word would get back to the perpetrator. Like that's how naive I was. And in some ways I'm still healing. Okay, so she says, no, do they know that they hurt you? Like I said, the one died when he was 28. The other one, he was living in British Columbia at the time. And so I thought, okay, I'll try this. Now I want to just sort of say, the thing is you give it a name, you challenge it. Because here she is challenging me, saying, like, does this man know he hurt you? Did you ever tell him you hurt me? You hurt me really bad. I suffered from it. Like I didn't know I had the capacity to do that. So again, this is the process. You give it a name, you challenge it. Something's challenged. So this lady, her name was Barbara. Um, she held space for me. It supported me. When I went to the RCMP, she was there. Even before and afterwards, the support was there. And I sought out support too. I went to therapy. I did support groups within my own home. I wanted to know what this space looked like, what it felt like. I wanted to, like, as an artist, I delve into things, or even not even an artist. I think just a hunter. When people go trapping or hunting and stuff like that, you really want to know the territory. So like that's what I mean. You hold space, and then in the whole process of it, you get to bear witness to the injustice that was done to you. And just that process of bearing witness took me 6 years. Now, these two young men who um, charged this head chief, I can't even imagine. I could only somehow imagine like the courage it took and what they're still going through and all the support that they've managed to find that space, the support system for them to be in this place right now is a space. When they go to court, they will bear witness to the injustice that was done to them. So for me, when I went to court and I faced my accuser, I said to him, "You hurt me." I had to say it in a confined space with a person in a position of authority holding this perpetrator in handcuffs with witnesses, lawyers, common everyday citizens, to hear me say to him, "You hurt me." That's how secure and safe I had to be. I want you to understand that. When you're a victim and you have a dangerous perpetrator who is capable of killing you, you need to have protection. And that's why these men who came forward have that courage. Just the reality of standing alone, bearing the injustice that was done to you. This whole system of systemic racism, we had no control of being born into it. But as human beings, we do have a right. We have a right to restructure this foundation that we were born in. Yes, the basement and the foundation is all faulty, but we need to build it. We need to help our young people, find a structure, a safe place, so that our children can grow up holy and become holy teenagers, become holy adults, holy parents and grandparents. That in this whole process of life that they don't go missing spiritually or emotionally. And most, by the time they've gone missing, end up being murdered. So you want to talk about the phenomena of murdered and missing Indigenous people. And you want to know if you're helping, or even if you want to know what systemic racism is. We do it. We do it without even knowing because we're still healing. I wanted to do this podcast too because I know a lot of other things other than what is being played out right now. I know these things because I live in my community and I know the families. We know each other. And a lot of times people come into our lives who are opportunists trying to make money. And when they hold secrets of our leadership and don't disclose it, and I really question, do I trust them? it's easy for somebody to create a narrative for me and say, "Oh," and rightfully so. I have nothing to lose. But the reality of it is um, sometimes I get tired of being right, and at the same time, by being right means that the great wrong was done. Great wrong was done. And I jokingly say, "Oh, it took me 5 years to trust white women. It took me 2 years to trust white men." Even though I'm articulate and I'm educated and I've worked off reserve and I've worked in another country, I use that analogy so people sort of get it. If you can't if you can't go through the process of systemic racism, like I said, challenging it, giving it a name, holding space, and being there as an ally, bearing witness to the injustice that's done to this indigenous person, then won't trust you, either male or female. And for a lot of non-indigenous women, you're no different than me. It's a little harder for women to look at it that way because they really feel like they've got privilege, that they have a right to look at me and say, "Oh, she's lived this life." They've already created the narrative before I even open up my mouth, and I'm going, "No, you don't get it. I have community. I've been very blessed to have known people my whole life. I see how they've changed, how they've healed. I've seen how their lives have been ruined. These perpetrators ruin people's lives forever. This whole Indian residential school and religiosity has made so many fanatics that come to the victims and say, "Forgive them. Forgive the person who attacked you. Forgive that person who made you go missing spiritually and psychologically." Like that in itself is genocide. But that's what they taught in Indian residential school: grooming, oppression, forgive. My whole point in the podcast is there are some things that are unforgivable. Talking to this young man yesterday, knowing even within his own family and within my family. So how can you live with somebody who's done these crimes? Well, they're your family. You talk to them. You know that you're letting them know that you're there for them if they need anything, because they're human beings. It's what's called transformative justice, or some people might even have a difficult time understanding restorative justice. But we're there for our families who've committed these crimes. Doesn't mean we forgive them, because what they've done is unforgivable. Some of these people, some of these children who go missing spiritually and emotionally, psychologically for decades. Sometimes you see the side effects through alcohol and drug abuse, them trying to bury or trying to find love. Then they end up at the hands of violent people and end up dying, murdered. There is an understanding. I think a lot of times people don't want to look at it when you say murdered and missing Indigenous people. When they say missing, they're saying they're not there in the house, they're not there in the home, we can't find them. Yeah, well, that's after they've been murdered, yes. But there is a stage of them, the transformative part of it. How do we restore, how do we help people go through restorative justice? We have to explain this whole process of giving it a name, of holding space for it, See, the thing is, when people hold space, it's the people who are sharing and supporting each other that takes courage. Are you afraid to lose your job because you're going to support this victim? Are you afraid you're going to look bad and not look like a good person because you're supporting the victim? There's a lot of times people gravitate to people who are in positions of power because as women, I'm just talking as a gender issue here, we gravitate to people in positions of power because we believe in a false sense of self that we're powerful. When really we're just associating with a person in position of power who's oppressing us. That's grooming, Indian residential school, colonialism. So the whole process of holding challenging whatever the violence is. In this case, it's sexual assault. In this case, it's rape. It's a name. It's a name. You have to say the name. It's like when somebody goes missing and murdered, you have to say their names because they did their lives did matter. Just like my relative, like I said, as a child, beautiful child, beautiful girl, read books. I had a hard time reading, so I really admired the fact that she could read. And throughout my life, I've tried to encourage young people to read. Leadership, was present, created youth groups. Um, just art, just the dynamics of what she could have been. I remember that. And I told her son, I said, because of your mother, this is the life I've lived. Because she had so much potential in not her herself, is how she saw being indigenous as a child, which is holy. This identity of being indigenous is holy and was taken away from us by colonizers. Now, I like doing this podcast because I know there are a lot of immigrants who come into Canada and they're really wondering what is it like to be indigenous. I like, and I admire that. I admire that, and um, I think sometimes, like I'm very pitiful. I think in the admiration of immigrants being allies makes me very pitiful because you grow up amongst people your whole life, who are racist towards you, who don't even want to know your history, don't want to even know that 2/3 of all the vegetables that humanity eats came from indigenous people. Don't want to know the richness of all those sacred sites in North and South America. Who want to deny that as a species that we existed, that we still exist. Yes, immigrants are really, like I said, I feel pitiful in front of them because I think a lot of times as Indigenous elders, we get tired of trying to educate non-Indigenous people. And when I say that, I'm saying non-Indigenous people who've grown up here in Canada, who were born here. It's refreshing when an immigrant comes in and they're there wanting to be allies and come to bat for us. It may cost them their jobs or reputation, but whatever and why ever they do this, just to be holding space for people like me, it is amazing to me as an elder. And I say this to young people. My parents didn't have this, and nor did my grandparents. But as young Indigenous people, that opportunity exists today. I truly believe for Bryce, my story, there are thousands of other stories of people who knew people who went missing. And maybe we need to talk more about that in a safe and secure place. That's why when I go to meetings and I say to people, when I talk, I need you to protect me. After I talk, people gravitate to me, and I say to people, um, it's overwhelming. Um, I don't have the capacity to be that ally for them. I'm just there to trigger and stimulate and let them understand that there's a process out there. And whatever part of the stage of the healing process they're in, more power to them, more like to let them know this it's worth it. Just like my friend told me, if you when you get through this, you'll wonder why didn't I do it earlier? It was hard. Am I trying to find indigenous women who had gone through the same experience I went through? That was in the 80s and 90s. Now it's 2024, and it's still happening. Like one of the elders told me, she said, "Marina, it's just one battle we've won, but there's so many battles ahead of us, especially when a lot of these sexual assaults are historical, and rightfully so." When I started my blog against Nathan Chasing Horse, I'd hoped that his victims, who had been children at the time, would find the courage sometime in their life to come forward. And they did. 18 years later, decades, like a decade and so later, they came forward. It's the same thing with these men. They're in their 60s now. This happened to them in their 30s. They came forward. There's no statute of limitations. It's important to find the courage, your voice, give it a name, say it, what the name is. Like I said, I talk about it. I didn't know that I had to have somebody hold space for me. Because so many people didn't want to support me. So many people were so triggered by their own sexual assaults that it triggered them. So they couldn't hold space for me. All my relatives who I buried didn't have the capacity to hold space for me. Even non-Indigenous women couldn't hold space for me. Now, what does that say about non-Indigenous people? The opportunities that we as Indigenous people have to share our strength and our courage with those out there who don't have community, who do not have culture. This is the gift we are still giving. Our ancestors gave this to us. We do these things not for ourselves, but for people, for community. Some people call it a holistic way of healing. It has to be, because there are so many opportunists, mental health workers, psychologists, and sociologists, and name it up the yin yang, who want to know what it's like to be Indigenous, and especially people whose great great grandmother had some Indigenous blood, or grandfather. I jokingly say, yeah, I've got 6% of my DNA isn't Indigenous. Do I call myself European? But apparently, if you're white privileged, you can get away with calling yourself Indigenous. But for me, as a survivor, show me, talk to me, challenge me. Hold space for me. Stand beside me as I bear witness and help others bear witness to the injustice that was done to them. Can you do that? You who are pretending to be Indigenous, can you do that? Do you have the courage to do that? Do you have it inside yourself to do something for others rather than yourself? My parents used to say that, and my grandparents. Now, as an elder, I understand it. But this being said, I wanted to put this out on a podcast. As painful and as heartbreaking as it is, the victims out there in my community, men, my heart goes out to them. The courage it must have taken. Like, don't people realize, like, I have brothers, I have nephews. I used to think about my mother and my dad, helpless kids in those places, treating them like the way, like dogs, like animals. You don't be an elder and listen to your relatives, those who came before you, is a sacred thing that we hold in us. Creator, the will is being done. Our relatives have shown us this. So for me, without the religiosity of people saying and using religion to justify a crime that was done, when you go up in a community and you know people, in support of these victims. I'm in support of these victims, and I grew up here. I grew up here in my community, and I've seen lives lost. I know I'm fortunate. I I've lived as long as I've lived. I'm educated. I lived in the United States for, like, I worked hard my whole life. Never had a partner, did everything, never had children. I sacrificed so I could experience this life. This life that my ancestors, my relatives prayed for. Generations after generations praying for the next generation. So I say, you know, this is who we are as Indigenous people. I know sometimes I hear non-Indigenous people marvel at just the thought, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I do have allies and non-Indigenous people who I've trusted and continue to trust. Like I said, I find myself very pitiful in front of them. I think if there were more non-Indigenous people that I grew up with who had that capacity, I wouldn't feel so pitiful. But that's the reality of being Indigenous here in Alberta, here in Canada, here in North America. So thank you for listening to me. I'm going to post this podcast, and hopefully people will find it in whatever area or situation they see it. And I'm going to be also posting other podcasts about how I grew up and understood healthy human sexuality. I'm going to post some more content of what it was like to grow up in my community where there was no TV or radio, just the sense of community and how people just came forward when they needed you. When my parents needed people, they came to the doorstep. They were there. So stories like that, and stories of what it is to be Tsuut'ina. See, I grew up here, but yet my heritage is Dakota Sioux. I spoke Sioux fluently by the time I was 5 because there were so many Sioux people who had married into Tsuut'ina. So those things in the podcast, I will be talking about. I do have help and people taping for me, and they're hour to. So I have two 2-hour episodes that I will hopefully within the month post. But for the time being, I think this podcast is very triggering. Um, if you have a therapist, call up a therapist. If you have a support group, call up your support group people. If you need to go to therapy, find a therapist, hopefully an Indigenous therapist. Um, but that being the case, I just people say, well, why do you do this? It takes a lot for you to do. They say I couldn't do it, and I'm going, that's just part of being a matriarch, uh, an Indigenous matriarch, because I do believe it's important for allies to understand it. It's a process. It's a process, and I hope people are kind to themselves and are patient. Sometimes people never see justice for themselves,